The Islanders head to Madison Square Garden tonight to take on the Rangers. We have a special crossover episode along with Chik of Locked On New York Rangers to preview this game and discuss both teams' starts to the season. We've got all that and more on today's Locked On Islanders podcast.
Your Locked On Islanders, your daily podcast on the New York Islanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We've got Rangers, we've got Islanders, we've got a big-time Metro Division rivalry matchup coming up, and Gil Martin and I going to break that all down for you guys in just a second.
You're Locked On the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome back, Ranger fans and Islander fans. As I just mentioned, we've got a very special crossover edition for you guys here today. This is Chik with Locked On New York Rangers, joined by my good friend Gil Martin from Locked On New York Islanders. Gil, how we doing tonight? I saw, the Islanders obviously just got an overtime win there against the Flames. So how are you feeling, and are you ready for some Rangers Islanders?
I am always ready for some Rangers Islanders. Bring it. I mean, as a longtime New York area hockey fan, it doesn't get better than this rivalry. So as far as I'm concerned, Islanders, last night sleepwalked. How do you didn't play well for the first 45 minutes and then really turned it on in the second half of the third period. Got 2 goals in 59 seconds. Ended up winning it on a power play goal in overtime. They were lucky to escape with 1 point. Very good to get 2.
Yeah, that's actually exactly how the Rangers just lost their most recent game against Detroit, only they gave up the lead, in the second period, and then they lost while being shorthanded in overtime. And we'll get to that in due time, of course. But, Gil, I wanted to ask you, man, obviously Sorokin played for the Islanders tonight. He's off to a really nice start this season. Would I be correct in assuming that we're probably looking at Semyon Varlamov, who has kind of had the Rangers number at least a couple of times over the last handful of seasons here?
I would say that's the odds-on favorite. I mean, it's been like mostly 2 games for Sorokin, 1 for Varley, but on a back-to-back, they would tend to go with the opposite. And I think because Varlamov has a good history against the Rangers, they don't mind having him in there.
Yeah, it makes sense. It kind of lines up nicely for them. And, I'm sure for the Rangers, it'll be Igor Shesterkin back out there. Obviously they went with Halak the last game against the Islanders, kind of mixed results for him. But, Igor's obviously the franchise goalie, and I'm sure they're going to look to put their best foot forward, and hopefully they can get a win here because it's been tough sledding for the Rangers, thus far this season. Some very just uneven results and, just falling into some habits that I think Ranger fans saw them break away from last season. So it's kind of surprising to see them revert the way that they have. And again, we'll get into the struggles of the Rangers in due time here. But Gil, I did want to ask you about Lane Lambert and your, first impressions of him. Obviously, Trotz and the Islanders part ways in the offseason. Lambert getting his first opportunity here really ever, as far as being a head coach is concerned. So, yeah, man, I mean, how are you feeling about him? What are the early returns in the Lambert era here?
So far, overall, I'd say it's pretty positive. He seems to be opening things up a little bit more for the Islanders. I mean, look, they're still a defense-first team. We're not looking at the second coming of Gretzky's Oilers here, But
right.
Lambert seems to allow the defensemen to have a little more leeway to step up into the play and join the rush. Obviously, you still want to be responsible defensively, don't want to get caught, but activating the defensemen into the offense has been a big help for the Islanders, and that's why the goals for is higher than it has been under, Barry Trotz's last few years.
Yeah, I saw they're kind of middle of the road in terms of, goals for per game. I think they were like 13th or, that might be a little bit different now that this game is just wrapped up against the Flames. And obviously those numbers are going to fluctuate a little bit early in the season, but seemingly a team that's playing a little bit more open this season. And 2 guys that have really gotten off to nice starts for the Islanders and 2 guys that they're going to need, Anders Lee and Matt Barzal. last year probably could be considered a little bit of a down season for both guys, at least compared to their standards. So, I mean, what are you seeing from the two of them, and how encouraging is it for you and other Islander fans that they've gotten off to the, hot starts that they have here?
It's kind of like two opposites because Lee is getting it done with goals, and Barzal doesn't have any goals yet, but he's more than a point a game, all on assists.
Yeah.
So, go figure. I think if you added up the distance of all the goals Anders Lee scores, if he scores 30 goals, it would probably be 35 feet total over the course of the season. He scores in close. He gets his deflections, his rebounds, his tips. But he's so good at it, and he really is. If he's scoring, it really helps the Islanders offense a lot. With Barzal, it's all skating. It's what he does in open ice. And then when he gets into the offensive zone, he'll stop on a dime and create time and space by his speed and his ability to change direction so sharply. So, two guys with very opposite styles, but two guys who are really getting the job done here. Especially, the Islanders have now won 6 out of 7. And during that 7-game stretch, those two have been key contributors for the Islanders offensively.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Lee getting all of his goals from in deep. I mean, it's kind of like what we saw from Kreider last season. But you
Exactly.
need somebody that can do that. You need somebody that can get you those tip-in goals, stuff in those rebounds, whatever it might be, the dirty goals. But, kind of a bigger picture question for you here, Gil. Last year, obviously, disappointing season for the Islanders. They had been to the conference finals or the equivalent of the conference finals for 2 straight years. I know one year it was like, well, I think it was just called the semifinals because it was the COVID year and all the divisions were different and everything. But bottom line, they were one of the last, 4 teams standing for 2 straight years. Big step back last year. But it also felt like, as a Ranger fan watching this, it was one of those seasons where everything that could go wrong went wrong for the Islanders last season in terms of injuries, in terms of, COVID absences, and, general maybe players underperforming a little bit. But I mean, are you of the belief, and do you sense the Islander fans are of the belief that, last year's down season was just that? It was just a down season. It was kind of fluky, and we can get back to being that team that can make a deep run. I mean, does that belief exist among Islander fans?
I think that belief exists, but I think there's a certain amount of doubt also. I mean, I think it's like, show us right now. They think the team can get back to that. I think they can. I mean, look, winning 6 out of 7, beating the Rangers, the Avalanche, some pretty good teams, the Hurricanes in that stretch does give you back some more confidence. But I think, you have a new coach, and the way the team struggled last year, there's just a little bit of sort of, they need to see it, the fan base, in order to get that full confidence back.
That makes sense. And, Gil, I figure we'll keep rolling in just a second here, but we do have to let everybody know today's episode, the special crossover edition, is brought to you by BetOnline.net. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and esports. We've got it all at BetOnline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. And Gil and I would certainly just like to thank everybody for making Locked On New York Rangers and Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. And of course, both shows are free on all platforms. And
So John, the Rangers so far, not off to the start I think that most Ranger fans were hoping for, especially after the very big playoff run that they had last year. But there's a lot of turnover. A lot of players from that team who did not come back. How is the adjustment period going with the new players integrating themselves into the lineup?
Yeah, I mean, I think for sure, you look at the team last year that made that playoff run. The Rangers obviously made a lot of additions at the trade deadline last year. They had a ton of cap space, so they could pretty much do whatever they wanted, as long as they were willing to, give away enough assets to bring certain players in. But yeah, I mean, you look at guys like Andrew Kopp. I think he did a great job for the Rangers. Frank Vetrano added a shoot first kind of a player that the Rangers kind of were lacking and might even still lack now. Tyler Mott, good defensive forward. Justin Braun, a nice depth defenseman, and all those guys are gone. And it's interesting because this offseason, the only like really big name guy that they brought in was Vincent Trocheck. And so far, so good for him. I mean, this guy, plays with a lot of energy, plays with a certain feistiness. One of those guys that gives you, a little bit of everything. He can kill penalties. He's been playing on the Ranger top power play unit. And obviously, that was a very strong quintet for the Rangers this past season. And he's fit like a glove there. Him and Artemi Panarin seem to have some pretty natural chemistry. And so far, so good for Vincent Trocheck. He wins you some faceoffs. Like I said, does a little bit of everything. But, they do miss some of those guys from this past season. And, if Trocheck's your only addition, but you lost all the players that, I just mentioned that they lost, it's not as good of a roster right now as the one that we saw at the end of last season. Of course, the way to kind of counteract that is if you get big leaps forward from guys like Kakko, Lafreniere, Hedel. You can maybe even throw guys like Kravtsov and Gauthier into that mix as well. And, with Kakko and Lafreniere, those are the two that always stand out because they were such high draft picks. I do think that their play has been better than their point total would suggest. Kakko has been maybe the best forward for the Rangers these last two games, but it's just not quite adding up to the offensive numbers. And you hope that eventually they'll get there and it'll happen. The Rangers in this most recent game, really disappointing loss to Detroit. They shuffled the line combinations in the third period, and they're going to go with kind of a similar lineup, it looks like, against the Islanders. That's, what they did in practice at least. So, yeah, man, just kind of up and down, beating some good teams like the Lightning and the Stars. And I'm forgetting at least one really, the Wild, they beat them on the road. But then losing to teams like the Blue Jackets, the Red Wings are improved, but they should have won that game last night, losing to the Sharks. So, yeah, man, just really up and down. It feels like you're playing roulette with this team on any given night right now.
Are you concerned that Igor Shesterkin's numbers, I know it's early, but they're not really where they were a year ago?
I'm not too worried about that. I mean, small sample size, and I think eventually he's going to round into form here. There have been a lot of goals that he's given up where he was kind of hung out to dry. Maybe a goal on the softer side or two, thus far over these games that he's played here for the Rangers. But I mean, to me, more than anything, it's just kind of a reminder that, oh, right, this guy is human. He's not a complete machine out there. It's going to happen from time to time, and you just hope that the Rangers can find a way to pick each other up, because that's what they did, last season. At this time last year, the story of every game was, how did the Rangers win that game? And the answer was always Igor Shesterkin. And now, you're not getting this, otherworldly performance from Igor Shesterkin on a night in and night out basis. And unfortunately, the team hasn't been able to pick him up a whole lot, early in the season here. But again, you just hope that they can get back to what they did last year so well, and that's having each other's backs. And when somebody falters, somebody else picks them up.
Mika Zibanejad has been outstanding on the power play early, but the power play itself has been inconsistent. What do you see that they're not doing that the power play has struggled at times?
Yeah, I mean, again, that's another area where I know they're kind of like a middle of the road power play team right now in terms of the success rate on the man advantage. But I would argue that for the most part, they've been good on the power play. I think if there's been any issue, it's that they've been a little bit too reliant on the Mika Zibanejad one-timer. Now, on one hand, a Mika Zibanejad one-timer is a good thing because he's got just an absolute missile of a shot. And when you've got Panarin setting him up, I mean, that's a match made in heaven. We've seen the kind of passes that Panarin can make. He can squeeze it through some pretty tight windows, and him and Mika can really link up for some beautiful goals on the power play. But I think there's been times where they've looked for that too much, and you can see when teams are down a man against the Rangers, they're keying on that. They're doing everything they can to try to take away that pass from Panarin to Mika, and pretty much saying to the Rangers that, okay, you're going to have to score a goal some other way. And, Mika scored on a one-timer on the power play in the last game, but teams are keying on that. And I think once the Rangers can get back to, just kind of sharing the wealth on the power play, maybe Panarin can shoot a little bit more often. You got to get Kreider going a little bit because he's certainly not scoring at the rate that he scored last season. And, not enough of those dirty tip-in goals from Chris Kreider. We were talking about that a minute ago with Anders Lee. And, with Kreider, you're so used to seeing him just redirect pucks into the net. And, if he doesn't do that, the puck's laying there, he cleans up in the crease. So you need that. And, Adam Fox, wouldn't mind seeing him shoot the puck a little bit more as well. But the power play, honestly, is probably about the least of my concerns with the Rangers right now. I do think, again, the success percentage right now is not indicative of how they've played on the power play. And fingers crossed that, obviously they get it going, hopefully against your Islanders tonight here, Gil.
Well, you said the power play is the least of your concerns. What through the first 13 games is the biggest of your concerns?
Yeah, I talked about this a little bit on a recent episode. I think probably the biggest concern right now is the Rangers just are not getting the secondary scoring. I was talking on a recent episode that it feels like if one of the top five guys, that being Panarin, Mika, Kreider, Fox, and Trocheck, if one of those guys, or if those five guys are not, scoring on a night in and night out basis, you just start to wonder, like, where's the scoring going to come from? And you like to think that eventually Kakko and Lafreniere will not just be secondary scorers. They'll be guys that are eventually leading the way for this team. But, as I mentioned earlier, the points just haven't been there. And then when you look at the Rangers' bottom six right now, again, and they've juggled the lines a little bit, so they've spread out the scoring a little bit more than they have in the past. But, man, I mean, you were running out a bottom six of, like, Goodrow, who I really like. Goodrow had a new career high in points last year, but you think of him more as a defensive forward. Goodrow's out there. Veezy's out there. Ryan Carpenter, Ryan Reeves, Sammy Blais. These are not guys that you really expect to, lay at the score sheet on a night in and night out basis. So that is something that concerns me a little bit. And, Jacob Trouba and Keandre Miller, such a dynamic pairing last season. Both had really good seasons. Miller looking like he was going to be a superstar, in the making. And I think eventually he'll get there. But Trouba and Miller have both scuffled to start this season as well. So not as concerned about those two. I think eventually they'll figure it out. But I would say my biggest concern right now might be the lack of secondary scoring that's kind of plagued this team in the early goings here.
And not worried about Kreider long term?
Yeah, Kreider, 52 goals probably was not going to happen again this season. That's hard for anybody to do. Connor McDavid didn't have 52 goals last season. So, but yeah, it's kind of in a situation where he's gone back to the old Chris Kreider. Can be very hot, very cold, game to game. He's on fire for a couple of weeks. He disappears for a couple of weeks. We might have reverted back to that. And, yeah, unfortunately, that's kind of just something that you have to live with when it comes to Chris Kreider. But you hope that he can figure it out and get back to his recipe of just basically dominating in the crease and scoring a lot of those dirty goals, as we talked about just a minute ago.
Yeah, well, certainly Ranger fans hoping he can do that. Islander fans hoping he doesn't do that tonight. So we'll have to see how that goes.
Yeah. Shall we let everybody know, Gil, about SimpliSafe?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, if you've thought about securing your home with home security but have been putting it off, you'll want to listen up. Right now, Locked On Islanders and Locked On Rangers listeners can order the #1 rated SimpliSafe home security system for 50% off. This is their biggest offer of the year, and you won't want to miss it. Here's why I love it. In an emergency, you've got 24/7 professional monitoring agents using Fast Protect technology exclusively from SimpliSafe to capture critical evidence and verify that the threat is real so you can get priority police response. SimpliSafe is a whole home security with advanced sensors for every room, window, and door, HD security cameras for inside and out, smarter ways to detect motion that alert you only when a threat is real, and even hazard sensors that detect fires, floods, and other threats to your home. Don't miss your chance to save big on the only security system I recommend. Get 50% off any new SimpliSafe system at simplisafe.com/lockedonnhl. This is their biggest discount of the year, so don't wait. That's simplisafe.com/lockedonnhl. There's no safe like SimpliSafe.
Yeah, so Gil, I figure, we can kind of start wrapping up a little bit here. I was going to ask you if there's anybody that, Ranger fans should keep an eye on in this game, somebody that's kind of stood out for you in the early goings here that maybe isn't a household name like your Barzals and your Anders Lees, so on and so forth. Anybody that's kind of caught your eye here in the early goings for the Islanders?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, boy. One player who I think has just gotten things done, he hasn't scored a goal yet this year, but Casey Cizikas has just been really good at doing the little things, winning faceoffs, back checking, killing penalties. He is not a guy who's going to show up in the box score as far as goals and assists, but he is sort of the pulse maker for the Islanders. If he's having a good game, if he's hustling, if he's hitting, if he's back checking, the Islanders will be playing well, generally speaking. And if he's kind of slumping, then the Islanders may not be playing their best hockey. One other thing Ranger fans should be aware of, Cal Clutterbuck left the game against the Flames on Monday night. Early did not return, so his status may be up in the air for tonight's game at the Garden.
Fair enough. And for the Rangers, I would say somebody to keep an eye on, for Islander listeners that I'm sure are checking out this episode here. I would say maybe Philip Hedl because, he was off to a nice start this season, only had 3 points in 6 games. Then he got injured. He got back into the lineup in this most recent game, had a chance to maybe score what probably would have turned out to be the game-winning goal late in the game against Detroit. Was not able to finish on the doorstep there. But, somebody that really came into his own last year in the playoffs. And as I mentioned, somebody that's going to be key for the Rangers. They have kind of reconfigured their lines a little bit. And if the practice lines are to be believed, it looks like he will be centering the third line with Kreider on the left wing and Kravtsov on the right wing. So kind of an interesting trio there as the Rangers, look to solve their issues and shuffle the deck a little bit. And, definitely kind of an interesting trio there for the Rangers. But yeah, as far as secondary scoring goes, it's got to be Philip Hedl. And, I think now that he's had a game back under his belt, he'll come back strong in this game against the Islanders here tonight, but we shall see.
Yeah, should be an interesting game and definitely something to watch. And I think, pairing him on a line with Kreider gives him a chance to be more productive.
Yeah, and I'm just kind of hoping right now that, as far as Kreider is concerned, that this is kind of the thing that kind of wakes him up and gets him going a little bit. I don't know if you saw, Gil, but the game against the Red Wings, as I mentioned, they really shuffled the deck from the second line going into the third period, or the second period going into the third period. Rangers had a terrible second period, and they actually dropped Kreider from the first line all the way down to the fourth line. Had him out there with Carpenter and with Gauthier. And I don't think it was entirely unwarranted because, there's been times this season where, Kreider just hasn't been as engaged as he needs to be. Hopefully the message has been received. They did start him in the overtime period despite the demotion in the third period. So, we'll see. But hopefully that's the thing that Kreider needs to get going. I know you're hoping that doesn't happen tonight, but I am. So there you go. Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So what are you looking at tonight? What to you is the keys to the game and what's your prediction?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the Rangers, it's just getting back to the basics and getting away from some of these self-inflicted wounds that have happened quite a bit early this season. As I mentioned, there's just been a lot of things that have kind of crept into their game this year that you're just not used to seeing for the Rangers. They gave up a goal the other night against the Red Wings because really sloppy line change, really lazy getting back to the bench. There have been times where they've taken some bad penalties. There have been times where they've been flat out outworked, which did not happen really at all last year. I mean, obviously 82 games, I'm sure it happened at least a couple of times, but so used to seeing this team outwork teams, and you need to do that against the Islanders because they obviously play this, grinding defensive style. So just getting back to the things that they do. And, something else that was a big trademark for the Rangers last year was their ability to respond to a loss. And unfortunately this year, they've had some games that they've lost and then come back even worse the game after, which again, it's just so far removed from what Ranger fans knew and loved about this team last year. So I'm looking for them to come back strong. But as far as, picking a winner for this game, it's a game that it's kind of hard for me to get a good feeling about it right now, just because of how things have gone for the Rangers. Obviously, Varlamov is going to play for the Islanders. We know how good he is against the Rangers. And the Islanders got a big win against the Flames tonight. Hopefully, they're all tuckered out from that, and they're a little bit flat at the start of this game. We shall see. But, again, the Islanders, Varlamov specifically, but the Islanders in general have kind of had the Rangers number the past couple of years. I know last year the Rangers went 2-2 against them, but one of those wins was when, 90% of the Islanders were on the COVID list, and they were basically playing an AHL team. So I don't know, man. It's going to be a tough game for the Rangers to win, and I think the Islanders might end up taking this one by a final score of 3-2. I think Capo Caco scores a goal for the Rangers, though. He's been really good lately. How about you, man? Any predictions as far as who's going to win, who's going to score, anything crazy that's going to happen in this game here?
Well, one key that I see for the Islanders, and it's been a problem for them all year, they get off to slow starts. The first period, it's like the puck drops and they're just sleepwalking for the first 20 minutes of the game more often than not. They can't let that happen, especially coming off, what is going to be a back-to-back after a tough physical game against the Flames last night. So it'll be important for the Islanders not to fall behind more than one goal early, which unfortunately they've been doing a lot more of than they'd like to do. Had a comeback win against the Flames, had a comeback win against the Avalanche. that's a dangerous game to play, and eventually it does catch up to you. So getting off to a fast start will be important. Mathew Barzal has not scored a goal all season long. He's a point-a-game player, but no goals. I think he gets off the schneid against the Rangers finally tonight, and that's something that I would look for. As far as a prediction goes, this is going to be a tight game. It always is. These two teams don't like each other. The fans will be into it, very active. And, the pot van chant is going to be out there at the Garden for sure. But I think that the Islanders will come away. I like your 3-2 prediction. I'm going to echo that one. And this is going to be a tight checking, low scoring. One mistake at some point will be the difference, and the Islanders will find a way to win at 3-2.
Yeah, I think you hit on something there too that's going to be big. I think the first goal, I mean, look, it's common sense. Obviously, you want to score first, you want to get a lead, you want to build on the lead as the game goes. But this to me, like you said, I think it's going to be a low scoring game. That first goal feels so important because when the Islanders have a lead, they've kind of got you in the palm of their hand. They can play their game and play that grinding style and not take too many chances. And the Rangers really struggle with that. So I think the Rangers, to have a chance to win this game, they got to get that first goal here. And any thoughts on that? Does it feel like the kind of game where the first goal could be huge?
It really could be. I mean, the Islanders have done a good job of coming back, but like I said, that's playing with fire. And especially on the road, if you can get that first goal, you quiet the crowd a little bit, you sort of change the momentum, and it would definitely benefit the Islanders to get it. No question about that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I figure we could pretty much call it there, Gil. This is great time as always. Always good talking some hockey. For any Ranger listeners that are checking out this episode, where can they find you and the show, on social media, and where can they find the show on all audio platforms?
Well, it's Locked On Islanders, wherever you get podcasts, and on YouTube. And you could find the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Isles. You could find me on Twitter at Ice Wars NYR VSNYI.
And for any Islander listeners, same deal. Anywhere you're listening to this show, you can find Locked On New York Rangers. You can find us on YouTube. You can find me on Twitter at JChik17, and you can find the show on Twitter at LO_NY_Rangers. And for myself and Gil Martin, Ranger fans and Islander fans, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Enjoy the game, and I'm sure we will do this again, Gil. And for Ranger fans and Islander fans, we will see you guys next time.
That's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Islanders podcast. I want to thank John Chik of Locked On New York Rangers for doing this special crossover episode. We will be back tomorrow with a full recap and key takeaways from this game against the Rangers, our weekly farm report, and a whole lot more. I want to thank you again for making Locked On Islanders your first listen. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast. The biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. It's available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. Until tomorrow, have a great day, everybody. Stay safe. And of course, let's go Islanders.